Hello everyone and welcome to Green Magic, your source for all things green and magic. Welcome to Commander Philosophy about power level. So this is a subject that a lot of people will argue about, disagree with. It seems to be hard for people to come to a general consensus on how powerful a deck is, where each level of power like what is an 8 versus a 7 versus a 6 or whatever. And there are various metrics used to kind of gauge power level. The simplest one, or maybe the most widespread given their influence, I will just refer very briefly to the Command Zone one. They did an episode a while back called How to Determine Your Deck's Power Level. And just similarly, real quick, or somewhat of a tangent, they did another one, Commander Mythbusters, and in this one, they briefly mention that the average game length for YouTube videos is 10.29 turns. So that's kind of relevant in just kind of gauging power level and how powerful, at least the content creators play. But the power scale that they use in their video, after having gone into several details about the consistency, the synergy, the interaction that you would expect at any given level, they do eventually summarize it in a chart that I think is just the easiest, most straightforward way to discuss the power level of a deck. And that is, what turn does it threaten to win? I would generally think, just mentally just skip the threaten part and go straight to what turn does it win. But it is an important distinction that they make, because you may have that turn or two turns or however long it takes of the setup to kind of get your things out. You know, you load them, you load it up, then you spike it down the next turn or two turns later or whatever. But sometimes the game is kind of wrapped up and you know what the eventual outcome is going to be a turn or two before it actually happens. But they real quickly just say turns 1 to 4 is a power level 10, 4 to 6 is 9. Those are both in that CDH kind of category. 7 to 9 is power level 8, 10 to 12 is power level 7. And then for anything longer than that, they just kind of lump it all together and say if it takes 13 turns or longer, it's power level 6 or below. There's no point in making a very big or important distinction between them, because it's all just going to blur together. Anything power level 6 or lower is going to just kind of be the same at that point. And again, I do want to emphasize that they determined in a different episode of Command Zone that the average game length is 10.29 turns. Why is that important? Well, they and a lot of other YouTube channels will talk about how to power up your decks, how to make your deck stronger, what are stronger cards. And there's some validity to that. However, what's really important is to know at what general range you're already playing in and what's powerful for that range. If you just want to be more powerful, look up what a CDH deck looks like and play that. Look for those power level 10, 9 decks and go for that. But if you're playing in a lower powered game, something that does go 10, 12, 13 turns, the same cards that are great in CDH aren't also going to be good for you. And so that leads me to the point of this video, almost 4 minutes in. How powerful is a card relative to the expected game length? That is the important question as far as determining the power level of given cards within your deck. Again, this is not to analyze the deck as a whole, but individual cards within the deck. And obviously certain things like synergies or cards that are very particular to a deck that'll make the results for that card within that deck very, particular. But as a general rule, how powerful is a card given the expected length of a game? And this is why I wanted to make sure that I point out, and I will repeat it again, the average game length, according to them, at least as it relates to YouTube videos, is 10.29 turns. So let's just look at a couple of cards and how good they are. Let's suppose that your game is expected to end about turn 4. Mox Diamond is a great card for a game of that length. And if you've ever seen CEDH or if you play CEDH, you are aware of that fact. If your game is expected to go to about turn 8, Nature's Lore is a pretty good card. It's not overpowered by any means, and it's not weak. It is a good form of ramp for that range. If you are expected to play a game out all the way till turn 12, Explosive Vegetation is actually a very good card. Now, some of you might want to point out that there are other versions of Explosive Vegetation. In fact, printed in both Ikoria and Zendikar Rising, there are 2 other versions of this card that are better. For the purposes of this video, Explosive Vegetation just kind of refers to any of those 4 mana ramp spells that get you 2 lands. So if that's something you're wondering, yes, it's just a placeholder for anything of that general category. Now, if it's not apparent why these cards are good at the relative game length that you would expect, just look at them real quick in a different length game. Flip those cards around. What if you were to play a game that you expect to end on turn 4? How good is Explosive Vegetation there? It's useless because you won't get it out in time for it to ramp you in any way that's helpful, and it just does not do anything for you. You can't play it on turn 1 or 2 unless you have Soul Ring and Mana Crypt out, and turn 3 and 4 it's not going to do very much for you. Turn 4 it would do nothing for you. It would be the worst top deck possible. Looking at Nature's Lore, that one's still in the middle, but it is worth pointing out that in a game that is going super fast, Nature's Lore won't keep up. It wouldn't be a terrible card, but it won't keep up on pace for that fast gameplay. And if you were to take Nature's Lore a little bit in the other direction, it also wouldn't be good. It doesn't do enough in a game that's expected to go as deep as 12 turns. So while it looks like it's sort of a golden mean in between, what is it? Golden means between extreme. It does have a narrow area in which it actually excels. But if you go too far in either direction, too short of a game or too long of a game, its effectiveness is diminished. On the far end, you see Mox Diamond. If your game is expected to go to turn 12, this card is terrible. If you get it out super early, you will maximize what you get out of it, and you'll have 12 turns of ramp. But how effective is that ramp really if you're not winning for 11 more turns or losing for 11 more turns? And if you top deck it on turn 10, 11, 12, whatever, it does nothing to help you actually do anything. So this is a great way of kind of showcasing how one of the most powerful cards is actually terrible if you're not playing fast enough to make it a great card. So let's look at just a handful of cards that kind of they are powerful at different points in the game. Soul Ring, Mox Diamond, those are great cards to get out on turn 1. Kodama's Rage Cultivate, if you get those out on turn 3, you're in a great spot for them. Gilded Lotus and Doubling Season, those are things that you want out around turn 5. Finale of Devastation, Insurrection, those cards become good in your hand somewhere around that turn 7 mark. So let's just look at a couple of them and kind of break it down. What if you have Doubling Season in your opening hand? It might feel good to know you have it, you'll get it, or you have it now, you'll have access to it when you need it, but it doesn't do anything in your hand right now. Turn 5-ish, okay, now if you draw it, you know that you can play it out, you'll have it, you'll be able to get its benefit for the rest of the game. Or maybe it gets removed, that's always a possibility. Maybe you choose to not play it out right away because you're afraid of it getting removed, but you have access to it at about the earliest time that you would possibly need it. It's a great time to draw it. On turn 9, if you draw it, okay, you've probably already played out some things that would benefit from it, so you've missed out on that extra benefit. However, at this point, you have the mana to play it and probably something afterwards, and whatever powerful things that you want to use for it, it's not too late to do that. So it's still going to do quite a bit of good for you, even at that late stage of the game. Mox Diamond, on the other hand, works in a very different way. If you get it out on turn 1, it's very powerful. It's going to do a lot of good for you. If you draw it on turn 5, you probably don't have extra lands in your hand to even discard to its ability. And even if you do and your card draw has been great, so you're fine discarding a land to do it, the ramp's not going to be that helpful for you. If you draw it on turn 9, that's just a super dead card. It doesn't matter if you even have, 12 other lands in your hand and you don't mind discarding them. The fact is that whatever ramp it gives you it's way too late and is not a very big amount. So let's just look real quick. Is Mox Diamond a good card? Well, that kind of depends. How long of a game are you playing? If you're playing a game that you're expecting to go 4 turns, yes, absolutely. It's a powerhouse. There's a reason it sees CEDH play. If your game is expected to go to turn 8, no, it's not at all. Because if you draw it super early, you're going to ramp a little bit, and then you'll be the target, you'll be the arch enemy, and whatever little boost you got right out of the gate is going to end up catching up to you, and your opponents will kill you. They'll gang up on you. If you're going to turn 12, then it's completely unplayable. At no point is it good. Even if you get it out on turn 1 and you're able to tap it for a mana for 12 straight turns, gaining you 12 mana, the relative value of that 1 mana isn't very much when your game is going so slow that it goes to turn 12. And you might make yourself a target. And if you draw it anywhere in the mid to late game, it's just not doing very much for you. In fact, let's kind of look at what point that card is good in a game. On turn 1, Mox Diamond is very great. Turn 2, still very good. Turn 3, a little bit less so, especially because it's less valuable, because by turn 3, you will have played 3 lands. Do you even have another one in your hand? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Probably not. Turn 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. On all of those turns, Mox Diamond is not good at all. It's not good as a way to ramp. It's not good. It's just as a ramp source, it giving you 1 mana isn't very valuable at that point. But also the fact that you have to discard a land isn't super good. In a very short game, in a game that's expected to go to turn 4 at the latest, it's very powerful, and the card disadvantage isn't really a problem because you are playing so fast that you don't care. You need to just play as fast as possible. Which is why in a game expected to go the first 4 turns, it actually has a range where it's going to be great to good. And so it's very good in that general power level range. In a game that's expected to go to in a game that's expected to go to turn 8, half of that time, or a little bit more so, it's not a dead card, but kind of a bad card. So in half the game, it's not what you want to be drawing, in which case, it's not a good card for that relative power level game length. If your game is expected to go to turn 12, for more than 2/3 of the game, that's not a card you want to draw. And even for the first few turns where you do want to draw it and get that maximum value over the duration of the game, it's not propelling you so far ahead that you're winning right away. So it's not doing a very good job at its job. Take a very opposite card now. Is Explosive Vegetation a good card? Well, how long of a game are you expecting? If you're expecting the game to go 4 turns, it's unplayable. Because even if you turn 1, you would need to turn 1, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, your land, cast Explosive Vegetation, and then you've ramped a couple more, which is good. But that's about it. Any other scenario, and it's not doing you anything. If you draw it on turn 3, you have 1 turn to ramp, and that's not good enough. If you draw it on turn 4, it's too late. That's your final draw of the game. If the game goes at 8 turns, yes, it's actually a pretty good card, and it just is. You'll want other ramp, you might want earlier ramp, but it's going to be very powerful at that game length. If your game is expected to go 12 turns or longer, or in that general range, it's a very good card, because not only does it ramp you, but the deck thinning at a game of that length is going to be very relevant. Even if you draw it on turn 10, like everybody's more or less running out of resources, not necessarily top decking, but maybe, thinning your deck out by 2 cards at that point might not seem very relevant, but it makes you that much more likely to draw the card you need on turn 11, or that much more likely to draw the card you need on turn 12, whatever the scenario might be. And obviously, if you get it out earlier in the game, turn 4 or 5 or something, then the ramp will be more relevant. But at no point is it really a terrible card. So let's kind of look at that on the chart. At what point is Explosive Vegetation good? Well, if it's in your opening hand or your first draw, it doesn't do anything for you yet. It's a dead card at that point. There's some satisfaction in knowing that you have it for later, but it's a bad card. Turn 2, you've had at least one draw since then, and so maybe that other draw will be something that you can play and is relevant or whatever, but you're getting closer to being able to cast it, but it's still, for the time being, a dead draw. Turn 3, it's good to know that next turn you'll have a ramp spell, but it is, as of this point, a dead card, unless you've already ramped and can cast it. Turn 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this is a perfect span of time to be casting it. It'll ramp you for later, and it's thinning your deck in a way that can be very relevant, again, depending on how long the game goes. Turn 9, not so good. The ramp becomes less relevant, but the deck thinning does, because at this point, everyone, or to some extent, everyone is kind of desperately hoping to draw the card they need. And if that's the case, the deck thinning becomes relevant. Turn 10, same thing. 11. If you draw it on turn 12, if that's your top deck of turn 12, well, this is the final turn of the game. You drew a card that doesn't help you. At that point, it's a bad card. But up until it's the final thing that you don't need, it's going to be good and relevant for most of the game. If the game only goes 4 total turns, it's never useful. If the game goes 8 turns, it's going to be useful for 3 out of those 8 turns. 4, 5, and 6 is when you would be fine with playing it. 3 if you had already ramped. 7, it's not so good. Turn 8's the final turn, and it's bad at that point. If the game goes 12 turns, then you have plenty of time where this card is functional and useful and practical, which is why I made sure to bring up at the very beginning, and I want to repeat it one more time, the average game length is 10.29 turns. Now, you know about how powerful or how long a game goes where you play. So, based on the information of your own game experience on game duration, what cards are good for what you're playing, for your play group? If you know that the games are super fast, well, you know to look for those CEDH cards. If your games are a little bit slower, those super powerful cards aren't actually good for you. They're going to be actively bad. And you need to look for the cards that are going to be more powerful relative to the timing of the game you play. Because if you just look at these cards or others based off of their objective power level, the ceiling for these cards, Mox Diamond is going to be one of the best cards. Explosive Vegetation is going to be terrible, and that's not how it's going to play out for you in your game experience, depending on game length. So, that was this episode of Commander Philosophy, and hopefully this has somehow influenced the way that you might approach your deck building philosophy. Thank you for joining me.